When I was 9 years old, my mother made me a butterfly net. And for the rest of my childhood, collecting and studying insects became my passion, a passion that eventually led me into a career in genetics. Insects are the most diverse, numerous, and successful organisms on this planet. They're an essential component of ecosystems around the world. In fact, without insects, life as we know it wouldn't exist.
Insects are animals of remarkable diversity. They are creatures of bold color, masters of camouflage and deception. Some are predators. Others provide sustenance in the web of life. Exploding populations of a few species spread pestilence and destruction. To some, insects are frightening and bizarre inhabitants of a dark and forbidding underworld. In fact, the diversity of insects allows life to flourish on our planet. Harvard entomologist and author Edward O. Wilson.
We tend to despise insects. They're part of the creepy crawlies that people generally would rather not have around in large numbers. But if you were to take away all of the insects instantly, poof, no more bugs, the world would collapse. At least the terrestrial world in which we live would collapse.
E. O. Wilson is a leading authority on ants. His writing describes insects and the diversity of nature, and his books have won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He views insects as the model for evolutionary success.
There are roughly estimated about 1,000,000,000,000 trillion, that's 10 to the 18th power, insects alive at any given time, and there are a mere 5.5 billion of us alive at any given time. Some would say that's really too many of them because we're gigantic organisms and we're messing up the world the way the insects never did. But in sheer numbers and diversity, there's no question that the insects are the most successful creatures, at least animals, that ever existed.
Our planet sustains an abundance of plant and animal species. Each has evolved unique characteristics to survive and thrive in a specific type of habitat. There are 750,000 identified species of insects. There may be as many as 5 to 50 million species, many times more than all other species of plants and animals combined. Insects are a dominant force in nature, and their success has been vital in creating our world. The world without insects would be harsh and inhospitable.
We would find ourselves living in a world perhaps much the way it was 500 million years ago. Very simple, very primitive, very difficult to exist in for a species like ours.
When the first insects evolved, the dry land was primarily barren. Most animals were aquatic. Primitive insect species were among the first creatures to inhabit dry land, and they helped create the terrestrial environment. Ours is a world of flowering plants, an alluring mosaic of colors, shapes, and smells that attract insects. There is a tight evolutionary bond between insects and flowering plants.
The world we live in today, human beings aside, consists on the land of two great empires. Little creepy crawly insects and flying insects, and their partners, the flowering plants. About 100 million years ago, the first flowering plants were just getting a root hold on the earth and spreading. And around 65 million years ago, they had begun to become predominant in the environment, the flowering plants. And a lot of the insect world hitched a ride on these plants by becoming pollinators and predators and by learning how to live in the plants and so on. And the plants, in many instances, benefited from the insects. They came to utilize the insects as their little pollen carriers, and that allowed quite a great diversification of flowering plants over what would otherwise have been the case without the insects.
Insect diversity is the legacy of evolution and opportunity. Changing and adapting, insects have refined physical designs and developed efficient means of reproduction and growth. The larval stage of butterflies and moths, for example, uses one environment for growth. Metamorphosis changes the animal into another form for breeding. Though much is known about the evolution of insects, their remarkable ascendancy over other evolving animals remains a mystery.
That is one of the great unsolved questions of biology. We talk about it all the time. I think the only answer we can give is a kind of historical answer, which is that the insects were among the early colonists of the land. They had some neat physiological tricks that made them good dwellers of dry land, and as a consequence, they filled up all of the possible niches before many other things could come along and compete with them.
A wetland is one of many habitats providing plentiful opportunities for insects. Dragonflies are aerial predators, tracking prey with enormous eyes. The female deposits her eggs on the stems of marsh grasses. The larvae develop underwater, feeding on other small animals. The larva of the caddisfly uses bits of debris to make a camouflaged shell. It scours the bottom, feeding on decaying vegetation. Flowing water delivers a bounty to water striders. These insects have evolved long legs they use as paddles and rudders to skate after small insects and crustaceans. A habitat like a wetland is a community of organisms whose lives are closely intertwined. Insects help remove impurities from the water and break down organic matter to produce soil. Many plants use insects for reproduction. Plants, in turn, provide habitat and food for other animals.
If you ever get lost and have to find food, don't waste your time looking for things like mushrooms. Even if they're not poisonous, they have very little food value. Go for insects, especially grubs that are full of fat and protein. Now, I know the idea may make you sick, but in nature, insects are a rich source of nutrition for other insects, as well as many other animal species, including humans.
Some prey are stalked, others are trapped. Caught in a spider's web, insects provide a female with the nutrition she needs to produce eggs. With large eyes, a praying mantis hunts by sight and stealth. Many species of birds, like yellow warblers, feed on insects. Flowers are often productive hunting spots. In the rainforest of South America, the Yanomami people use their understanding of insects to produce food. A tree is cut down and left for a wood-boring beetle to lay eggs. The larvae feed on the dead wood. Cutting into the decaying log yields a nutritious harvest. Some of the grubs are cooked, and some are eaten raw. Not all insects are passive prey. The stinger of this potter wasp makes it more than a match for this hungry but discerning spider.
One reason for our limited understanding of the importance of insects is that most of them try to hide what they're doing. For many small organisms, it's necessary for survival. There doesn't seem to be much going on in this quiet patch of woods, but in fact, it's teeming with life. You can check it out for yourself. Look under leaves, pull the bark off a dead tree, or roll over rocks or logs that are lying on the ground. You'll be amazed at the variety of animal species you can find.
The tiny holes in these leaves are a clue that a caterpillar is feeding safely underneath. Removing bark from a fallen tree exposes a carpenter ant who delicately retrieves a larva. The nymph of a spittlebug hides in a fluffy foam excreted from its body. Vulnerability demands shyness. Walking sticks survive by blending into the background. Some masquerades are elaborate. The Maclay's spectre is one of many insects disguised as the foliage they inhabit. The adult Maclay's spectre feeds surreptitiously by mimicking a leaf's motion in the wind. The immature stage is also camouflaged as an aggressive stinging ant. A moment's hesitation by a confused predator can allow escape. The thorny devil is safely encased in a hard shell covered with sharp spikes. The stems and leaves of the milkweed plant contain a chemical that is toxic to most animals. A few insects take advantage of this chemical protection. The larvae of the monarch butterfly and milkweed bugs have evolved digestive systems to safely feed on the plant and store the chemical in their body tissues. Bright colors advertise their poisonous nature. Predators, beware. The adult monarch feeds on nectar, but retains the toxic protection from the larval stage. These relationships occur in many habitats. The larva of this tropical cousin of the monarch feeds on a plant related to milkweed. A fear of insects denies many people access to the elegant complexity of nature. Often, it is a phobia established in childhood. This backyard summer camp tries to break down this fear.
They've got to be able to hang on well so that they can get where they have to go.
If they are encouraged to handle insects and look at them close up, most children find these small creatures fascinating.
If we were a cockroach, what?
Our face would be here, it would be under here.
Curiosity and freedom to explore in his childhood started E.O. Wilson on his way to becoming a scientist.
Unlike a lot of scientists who became committed to some field of science or other as a very young, my parents were not scientists. What they were was tolerant. I grew up in the deep South, Alabama and Florida mostly, which had, let's face it, somewhat relaxed educational system, which gave me a fair amount of time. Beautiful woods to go into and explore. And my parents were tolerant. They just let me do that, and I found my own way. There's something to be said for languor and unquestioned freedom in a growing child.
Ants are social insects that live in large colonies. These ants are farming aphids. The tiny aphids suck plant juices and excrete a sweet honeydew. The ants protect the aphids so they can coax out droplets of the rich fluid. It's a convenient relationship. Termites are also social insects. Termites digest wood, returning the elements to the soil. Social bees and wasps pollinate many of the world's flowering plants. Among social insects, E.O. Wilson believes ants have been the most successful.
Ants were predators that lived in the soil, that is, the ancestral ants. The termites were given in the theater of evolution, they were given the wood to digest. I mean, that's their great adaptation. They're cockroaches that digest wood. And that allowed them to be extremely successful, but then it put certain limits on what they could do. Wasps, bees, were creatures of the air. They fly from one place to another, and that's how they make their living. Ants had the ground. And, you know, I don't want to draw too tight a historical precedent, but if you own the ground, you own the soil, you own the world. And I think it's as simple as that.
E.O. Wilson spent many years studying leafcutter ants in Central and South America. They feed on the fungus that grows on leaves they harvest. In his office at Harvard, Professor Wilson keeps a colony of Costa Rican leafcutter ants beside his desk. Because of the elaborate organization of their colonies and their ability to communicate and cooperate, ants have distinct survival advantages.
One ant is no ant. Two ants, and you're beginning to get something entirely new. Put 1 million together like this, with the workers divided into different castes, each doing a different function, cutting the leaves, processing the leaves, looking after the queen, taking care of the young, digging the nest out, and so on. And what you've got is an organism fairly well integrated together, weighing about 10 kilograms. In other words, roughly, at any given time, about the size of a dog, and dominating an area the size of a small house, coming out of a nest from which some ardent soul once estimated was built by the ants moving approximately 40,000 pounds of soil, sending out great columns of workers like the pseudopods of an amoeba, reaching out and gathering in leaves and so on. And this is a very potent entity. I mean, it's something that can protect itself against predators. It can control the environment, the climate of its nest, where it gets its food, and so on. And if you do what I like to do often in the woods, when I encounter one of these big colonies of leafcutter ants or some other kind of, step back and sort of let your eyes go slightly out of focus. And what you see then is this amoeboid giant creature in front of you. That's how the ants and other social insects have done it.
Most ants in a colony are workers, non-reproducing females who perform a variety of tasks. The queen lives hidden inside the nest. Dwarfing her attendants, she is the only reproductive female. She lays her eggs, and the larvae and the pupae are cared for by worker castes. At certain times of the year, new queens and males are produced. The emerging new queen is winged. Ants mate in flight, and the fertilized female establishes a new colony. The queen rears the first young, and then these workers take over. Other worker castes are food gatherers. The ant carrying the larva has likely robbed it from another colony. A dead fly is a prized find. Having found a dead cricket, foragers leave a chemical trail that others follow to help retrieve the food. The intimidating soldier castes have large heads and powerful mandibles to fight off intruders. Within a colony, disease would normally be a serious threat with so many ants living so closely together. However, ants have evolved a means to prevent infection.
Ants have wonderful glands called metapleural glands. And if I were an ant, this is my waist, these metapleural glands would be located right here. And these metapleural glands are found only in ants, and they pour out a constant flow of secretions that are antibiotics. It's been found that they control fungi and bacteria, and it is almost certainly the case that they are able to maintain control over growth of microorganisms that might otherwise infect their dense populations, subterranean populations, and endanger the life of the colony.
The remarkable adaptations of ants are the result of evolution. Millions of other insect species have followed vastly different paths. Entomologist Steve Marshall is looking for one of the oldest surviving insect species. Called Dipleuron, it has changed very little since it appeared about 400 million years ago. Steve studies insect diversity at the University of Guelph and has discovered over 100 species of insects previously unknown to science. The work requires that insects be examined in minute detail. Each species has unique physical and behavioral characteristics that adapt it for survival. Food is a basic requirement for life, and different insect species have evolved many feeding strategies. The predatory stink bug has mouthparts shaped like a syringe to impale its prey. Insects that chew vegetation have quite different mouths. Using a microscope, Steve describes the complex construction of a grasshopper's mouth.
First of all, let's get oriented to the head. There's the eye, there's the antenna. You can see at the side of the head, at the bottom of the head, there's a pair of large jaw-like structures. These are called mandibles, and you can see that the mandibles are hinged at 2 points on the side of the head, lower side of the head. They use these big mandibles for chewing vegetation. There's an upper lip, as in all insects, called a labrum, and right behind the mandibles, you see these long segmented things. These are sensory palpi, and they come off appendages called the maxillae. And behind the maxillae, way back here, there's a lower lip or labium, and it's also got sensory palpi.
The powerful chewing mouths of grasshoppers are ideal for devouring vegetation. Other insects have different needs. Many adult moths and butterflies feed on the nectar in flowers. To do this, they need a mouth that can reach into the flower and draw out its sustenance.
Here's the head of a monarch butterfly. There's the compound eye and the antenna. The head of a butterfly is a little different from most other insects because you don't see any mandibles, but the butterfly adults instead have their maxillae modified into a long coiled tube. And this tube is made up of the two maxillae pushed together to form a two-sided straw. These big feathery things that are concealing the base of the tube are the labial palps, or the appendages of the lower lip. So we have quite a specialized head here.
Butterflies have another important adaptation. They can fly. The ability to fly is vital for the survival of many insects. The ancestors of dragonflies have a special place in evolution.
The first winged insect probably, well, certainly had wings which couldn't be folded. They were held outstretched, and may well have looked something like a dragonfly. And in fact, because dragonflies and another group, the mayflies, have wings which are the only groups of insects which have wings which can't be folded, they're considered to be primitive lineages.
Though ancient, dragonfly design has proven efficient. Their large eyes allow them to see potential prey on the wing. Though their wings can't be folded, dragonflies are nimble and maneuverable.
The great majority of living things are winged insects, so there has to be something there. Probably the role of wings in dispersal, in invading, colonizing new habitats, in modifications for predation. This is the case with the dragonflies. They're very, very efficient aerial predators. If you throw a little piece of dirt up in the air, when a darner like this is flying around, it'll take a 90-degree turn, dive down, check out the dirt, take another 90-degree turn, fly away and grab some mosquitoes. They're very, very effective predators. So wings have been the key to success for most living things.
Insects that can fold their wings have an added advantage. Folded wings make it easier to hide and allow the insects to use various habitats.
Somewhere early in the development of the winged insects, a discovery was made, and a special kind of folding mechanism was developed, just like the folding mechanism we have in modern umbrellas, which allow wings to be folded. And virtually all the living winged insects today are descended from the species that discovered that folding mechanism.
Insects may be creepy crawlies to some, but they are highly refined. In parts of the world, species of this frail-looking creature are a serious problem. Mosquitoes are some of the relatively few insects that plague humans. Mosquitoes feed on blood and can spread disease. Bites are painful and itchy. Gord Surgener studies mosquitoes and other pest insects at the University of Guelph. There are over 2,000 known mosquito species, but only a few attack humans.
It is only the female mosquito that takes a blood meal, and she does that to get protein to produce her eggs. Both the males and females will nectar feed. They feed on flower to get energy for flight and movement, and then she blood feeds to produce protein to lay her eggs. And some of them can take 3-5 blood meals, and with each of those is a batch of eggs, and a batch is usually between 100 and 300 eggs, depending on the species.
Most mosquito larvae are aquatic, feeding on algae and decaying vegetation. In northern climates, the mosquito's life cycle begins with the spring thaw.
Most mosquitoes in Canada get through the winter as eggs, where they're in moist, low-lying soil. And that area will flood in the spring with the melting snow and the April rains, and we get about 6 inches or a foot in depth of water. And the larvae will develop through the month of April into mid-May in that water area. They then pupate, and the adults emerge usually around the 24th of May weekend.
Mosquito larvae and pupae breathe air. The pupae regularly float to the surface to breathe. The larvae break down organic matter and are a source of food for some birds and fish. After the adults emerge in late spring, they spend the daytime resting in the shelter of grass and leaves, waiting for the opportunity to take a blood meal.
The primary things that attract mosquitoes are carbon dioxide. So as you and I breathe, carbon dioxide is wafted out. If I'm a mosquito, I smell that higher concentration of carbon dioxide, and as this one just did, I move up that concentration gradient, so you can see they're around me. And then in about this distance, they start picking up cues like heat, humidity. As I breathe, I produce more humidity, movement, so that a foot away or so they can pick up movement. And then they will land, and once they land, they then feel again the heat, and they probe to see to eventually hit a capillary. It says blood, and then they start to take the blood meal.
The mosquito injects an anesthetic to help prevent detection. It also produces an anticoagulant to prevent the blood from clotting. The painful and itchy bump is the body's response to a foreign substance. These researchers are testing repellents by counting mosquitoes that land and bite. There are few effective mosquito deterrents.
In Canada, we have 3 active ingredients. One is lavender oil, one is citronella oil, and by far the most common is DEET. That stands for diethyl M toluamide, which is a compound first developed in 1954. And as far as how it works, the mosquito knows you're there, or the black fly knows you're there. You get this halo around you, but there's a message to them: do not land here, or they lose the final cues to land and take a blood meal from you. We have 40 years of experience, but right down to the molecular level of how it works, we're not quite sure as yet.
Many of the insects that we call pests are a problem because they eat plants grown for food and industry. Almost every cultivated plant has one or more insect species adapted to live on it. These insects can dramatically reduce or even destroy a crop. Earwigs attack many garden plants. Insects like the corn earworm larvae eat the seeds of plants. Aphids suck plant juices. Some insects are closely associated with a particular plant. The lily beetle and the spotted asparagus beetle are found usually on the plants for which they are named. Tent caterpillars defoliate trees. The modern farming practice of large-scale monoculture helps create insect problems. Huge fields containing a single plant species are an invitation to insect attack.
Behind me is some of the most expensive farmland in North America. The sandy soil of this ancient lake bottom is ideal for growing potatoes. Yet despite the good growing conditions, farming here is threatened not by weather or the market, but by the Colorado potato beetle. Voracious feeders that can reproduce at a prodigious rate, the potato beetle can completely destroy a crop.
Don McKenzie is a second-generation potato farmer. Growing potatoes can be profitable, but in recent years, the potato beetle has become increasingly difficult to control.
I've got fields that I've grown potatoes on, or my family has, for 25, 30 years. And there are some of those fields I will not grow potatoes on next year. The ground's ready. They're good fields, but the Colorado is too great of a risk.
Colorado potato beetles feed on the leaves and stems of the potato plant. The adults spend the winter underground. They emerge when the plants appear, and migrating into the fields, they begin to feed and mate. The entire reproductive cycle is spent on the potato plants, and the large fields are an ideal habitat. University of Guelph entomologist Mark Sears.
Each female can lay several batches of eggs. Each batch probably has 35 or 40 eggs in it on average. Each female may lay 200 to 400 eggs. The larvae hatch from these eggs within 5 days. The larvae are really the damaging stage on the foliage. The small larvae that hatch from the eggs are not too serious, but over a period of about 3 weeks they mature into the large larvae, and these are the serious pests of potatoes. If you can control that infestation a little earlier in the season and avoid this stage of the damage, you're going a long way towards controlling the pest problem on your crop.
Monoculture creates a sterile environment where few of the natural predators that would limit the potato beetle can survive. For over half a century, farmers have used poisonous chemicals to tip the balance in their favor. Before chemical pesticides were developed in the early 1900s, farmers relied on biological control and crop rotation to control pests. These methods were quickly discarded with the introduction of lethal chemicals. In the beginning, the sprays gave fast and effective control. Amid the rush to wipe out pest insects, there was little understanding of the destructive power and danger of using sprays. Each chemical was only effective for a relatively short time because insects quickly developed tolerance. This meant every few years, new lethal compounds had to be developed.
There's 50 years worth of experience with this, what we call a treadmill effect. You get started and you find one chemical that works and discard it for the next more potent one. However, this process has its limits. What is the cost to society and so on in general for this treadmill effect in terms of constantly looking for new chemical forms of control?
Most sprays are broad-spectrum insecticides, chemicals that poison many different species of animals.
Using broad-spectrum insecticides to control a few insect species that are pests is like killing all of the people in a city to solve the problem of crime. The chemicals may eliminate the pests, but they also destroy countless other animals that are essential to a healthy functioning environment.
We learned the hard lesson in many parts of the world that when we were wiping out all of these insects, we were destroying a lot of beneficial insects, with the result that sometimes the pest species came bounding back because the predators, the spiders, the little wasp, the ants and others that had controlled them previously were eliminated.
Experience has shown that a diversity of plant and animal species is critical to maintain a vital environment. The most serious threat to diversity is the extinction of species. The leading cause of extinction is loss of habitat. Without the plants and other species they use to survive, even the most elaborate and effective ways of life fail. A single tree in the rainforest may be home to thousands of insect species, animals elegantly adapted to a very specific habitat. Destroying the habitat produces an inevitable result.
If you reduce a habitat, such as a rainforest or a patch of prairie, by 90%, you reduce it down to 1/10 of what it was before, you will eventually, much sooner than would otherwise be the case, see the number of species living there drop by 1/2. 90% area reduction, 1/2 of the species eventually lost. Some will go extinct quickly, maybe immediately. Some, however, will take decades, in some cases, like trees, centuries. But you're going to go there.
Each species lost takes a thread from the fabric of life. Because there are so many insect species, they are disappearing more quickly than other animals and plants. With each extinction, the world is gradually impoverished because insects are a fundamental part of nature. Insects help maintain a planet of clean air, pure water, and rich soil that are critical for the survival of many other animal species. The larger and more complex an animal, the more it requires a diversity of simpler organisms.
Humanity came along at a time when the diversity of life on Earth was probably close to its all-time maximum in geologic history. And humanity evolved in this rich environment, surrounded by thousands of species of plants and animals in different parts of the world, but in any given locality, a great richness.
Nature is rich and refined. Much of it is complex and mysterious. It is estimated that less than 10% of the insect species on Earth are known to science. What is known is that the evolution and existence of the legions of insect species is one of the pillars supporting life on Earth.